خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو حسير ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير وإذا ألقوا فيها سمعوا لها شهيقا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاء نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير فقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير وأسروا قولكم أو اجهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور أأمنتم من في السماء أن يخسف بكم الأرض فإذا هي تمور أم أمنتم من في السماء أن يرسل عليكم حاصبا فستعلمون كيف نذير فلقد كذب الذين من قبلهم فكيف كان نكير أولم يروا إلى الطير فوقهم صافات ويقبض ما يمسكهن إلا الرحمن إنه بكل شيء بصير أمن هذا الذي هو جند لكم ينصركم من دون الرحمن إن الكافرون إلا في غرور أمن هذا الذي يرزقكم إن أمسك رزقه بل لجوا في عتو ونفور أفمن يمشي مكبا على وجهه أهدى أمن يمشي سويا على صراط مستقيم قل هو الذي أنشأكم وجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة قليلا ما تشكرون قل هو الذي ذرأكم في الأرض وإليه تحشرون ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين قل إنما العلم عند الله وإنما أنا نذير مبين فلما رأوه زلفة سيئت وجوه الذين كفروا وقيل هذا الذي كنتم به تدعون قل أرأيتم إن أهلكني الله من معي أو رحمنا فمن يجير الكافرين من عذاب أليم قل هو الرحمن آمنا به وعليه توكلنا فستعلمون من هو في ضلال مبين قل أرأيتم إن أصبح ماؤكم غورا فمن يأتكم بماء معين صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much, Ahsan, Brother Muhammad. May Allah reward you both in this life and the next. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, just a quick announcement before we start for our viewers on YouTube. Vivox is the platform we use for our Q&A. Now, we do look at your questions on YouTube as well, but we do pay more attention to the Vivox. So log into vivox.app and the login will be on throughout the lecture. So inshallah, you guys can log in and ask your questions through there. Now, it's moderated, so your questions might not appear straight away. Now, in the last few nights, the dear shuyukh that we are lucky to have with us this Muharram have been discussing the companions of Imam Hussein and what we can learn from them and how we can implement those lessons to our lives. Now, the topic for tonight, inshallah, will be Qasim, the son of Imam al-Hassan, and youth, and the portrayal of youth in Islam versus culture and versus the West. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our highly esteemed speakers, His Eminence Sheikh Hamad Waqar, Sheikh Muhammad Dahaini, and Sheikh Ali Safdari. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبو القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Muhammad, Sheikh Ali. As always, thank you, brother. As always, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and especially on these holy nights. Last night, we spoke about Aun and Muhammad, alayhi salam, and we discussed oppression in the household. And this is a topic that, mashallah, there's so much to be spoken about. And inshallah, we can touch upon it in future nights as well, because I think there's just, it's so hard to talk about everything in one night. Then today, inshallah, we're going to discuss youth in Karbala, and we're going to describe how youth are perceived both in Islam, in our cultures, and in the West, inshallah. And we're going to kind of compare and contrast them. Tomorrow, we're going to look at the prayer of Ashura, and we're going to discuss prayer in Islam. On the 8th night, inshallah, we're going to look at Ali Akbar alayhi salam, and we're going to discuss how he's likened to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And then we're going to use that to discuss how the Prophet interacted with non-Muslims in a non-Muslim society, which we find ourselves in that same situation, so it's important. And then on the 9th night, we're going to dedicate that night to Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, and we're going to talk about brotherhood. Now, with youth in Karbala, so tonight, inshallah, the misal will be about Qasim ibn Imam Hassan alayhi salam, and we're going to use that to discuss youth. So there's plenty of youth who decided to give the ultimate sacrifice in Karbala. Many of them. We have Ali Akbar alayhi salam, who, according to some reports, was between either 18 to 27 years old. We have the sons of al-Banin, may Allah be pleased with her. And other than Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, who was in his 30s most likely, we have Abdullah ibn Ali, Uthman ibn Ali, and Jafar ibn Ali, who range from 19 to 25 years old. We also have another son of Imam Ali alayhi salam, Abu Bakr ibn Ali, whose mother is Layla. He's also known as Muhammad Askar or Abdullah. Then we have three of the children of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, Qasim, who, according to sources, range between 13 to 16 years old, Abu Bakr, and Abdullah. Abdullah is the one who was very young, who, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam was knocked to the ground, he ran out to try to protect him, and was martyred in that way. Now, these youth, they had strong, unshakable faith. They had insight, unbelievable insight, right? When Qasim was asked about death, he said that he responded that ahla min al-asal, that it's sweeter than honey, right? They had unparalleled loyalty, unparalleled bravery, unparalleled religiosity, unparalleled perseverance. These were amazing individuals. And I want to speak about them because they reached this station of spirituality and, of this station with Allah at such a young age. There's 3 hadith that I'm going to mention, and I know our ulama with me have more hadith as well, but there's 3 hadiths that I want to mention about youth, and then inshallah we'll open up a discussion. First one is from Imam Ali alayhi salam, and it's been recorded in Najul Balaga. It's been reported, he said, إِنَّمَا قَوْبُ الْحَدَثِ كَالْأَرْضِ الْخَالِيَةِ مَا أُلْكِيَ فِيهَا مِنْ شَيْءٍ قَبَلَتْهُ. The heart of the youth is like either fertile ground or a vacant, empty ground. Whatever is planted in it is accepted. Another tradition from our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Inna la yuhibbu shab alladhi yunfa shababahu fi ta'atillah. Allah loves the youth who spend their youth in obedience to Allah. And finally, this one, which is a really important one, also narrated from Imam Ali alayhi salam, and this has been recorded by Sheikh Tusi and in his book Al-Ghaiba. And it says this: the companions of the Mahdi, of Imam al-Zaman alayhi salam, are youth. There are only a few elderly amongst them. Now let's look, what is it that made the youth of Karbala reach that station and give that ultimate sacrifice? What is it that makes the companions of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, the youth of the companions, what do these youth look like? I wanted to take backward modeling, which we used before in a previous talk, and use that here, where we try to picture what does the companion, the young companion of Imam al-Zaman alayhi salam look like. And I'm going to propose there's 3 categories to examine: their religiosity, their knowledge, and their confidence, or their akhlaq in general. Now, with religiosity, right, we'll open it up here, but what I have is, I feel that a companion of the Imam, when we look at religion, would be one who worships Allah out of gratitude, out of love. Not one who only worships Allah out of fear of not going to hell or out of desire of heaven, but one who's transcended those aspects of religion and has taken a step further. And this is akin to the tradition from Imam Ali alayhi salam, also recorded in Nahj al-Balagha. A group of people worshipped Allah out of desire for reward. This is a worshipper of the businessmen or the traders, which isn't bad, but it's not the highest level of worship. Another group worshipped out of fear. This is a worship of slaves. Again, not bad, but there's a higher level. Yet another group worshipped Allah out of gratitude and gratefulness. This is the worship of the ahrar, of the free. And I feel the companions of the Imam would have transcended the first 2 stages and would have reached this 3rd stage, inshallah. Now, I don't want to keep talking forever. I want to hear what Sheikh Muhammad and Sheikh Ali have to say. So, Bismillah, let's open it up here. Are we teaching our youth to worship in this way? Or is this what's happening in our society?
Sheikh Ali, تفضل.
I don't know if Ali's here yet.
Okay. عظم الله أجرنا وأجوركم حبيبي شيخنا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Thank you very much. So I love the fact that we agreed to try and like I think you said, backward model, just try and reverse engineer a successful youth. And if there's something that is that's common between all of the youth of Karbala specifically, it's the proximity that they had, it's the role models that they had, it's the people that they were learning from, people that they were growing intellectually and spiritually from. And that's it's a very overlooked aspect of the youth. Like, the way I perceive youth is, a child or a young adult is one of the biggest investments you can make. It's this child that's going to, or this youth that's going to be, a big part of the future, that's going to be taking care of the future. If you have an ignorant generation today, they're going to grow up to be ignorant, And today, with in a society filled with information, and society that's rich when it comes to global connection, it's very important to understand the importance of your position in the role of a youth. So when you look at the likes of Qasim alayhi salam, or the likes of all of the companions you had just mentioned, you see that their that level of spirituality that they had, and that, I think this is the question of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. See, the Imam asked Qasim, he says, so the context of that question was, Imam Hussein alayhi salam had just told all of his companions that you're all going to be slaughtered tomorrow. He just told them, you guys are from the greatest companions and you're going to be slaughtered tomorrow. Tomorrow's the day we're all going to be martyred. And this is where Qasim comes up and he says, Ya Am, awa ana mimman yuqtal? Am I from the ones that are slaughtered? And this Imam Hussein alayhi salam, it's so interesting. He doesn't say, yes, you're the one that's slaughtered. Firstly, he takes into consideration, number one, that this is a 13-year-old, but he's got a mind. He's not some ignorant 13-year-old. Let me show you how knowledgeable he is. Ya Qasim, kayfa tara al-maut? How do you perceive death? And the way he answers this question is phenomenal. Like the way Qasim alayhi salam answers this question about a concept that is the most darkest of the most reality that's been feared amongst humans for as long as mankind has ever lived, death, which is feared, fiercely by mankind. A 13-year-old is able to come up and say, I perceive it sweeter than honey. And who is he sitting amongst? Like this Qasim alayhi salam is sitting amongst companions. Imam Hussein alayhi salam is asking for the opinion of a 13-year-old amongst the greatest companions that are ever to live. Look at the greatness that the child has. Look at the importance that this youth has in the eyes of Abu Abdullah. And this is why this you're able to plant. So Shaykhna, you mentioned a beautiful hadith that the youth, the heart of a youth, the mind of a youth, I think it's the Holy Prophet or Imam Ali alayhi salam, let me just bring up the hadith. He says that it is like he says,
الأرض خالية.
yes, كالأرض الخالية, أحسنت. Okay, another example, for example, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, learning something during one's youth is like engraving in stone. And learning something when one is old is like writing on the surface of water. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam from a young age, and his brother Imam Hassan alayhi salam from a young age, they teach their children from when they're in their mother's womb, whether it's with the ayat that they're reciting, or once they grow up, like Zainab alayhi salam, with that famous story that we hear with Sayyidah Zainab and Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he's teaching her at the age of 2 or 3. And he tells her, what's 1 + 1? And she says 1, and he says 1 + 1, and she says 1. I don't know if this is an authentic story, but I'm sure there's many stories that Imam Ali alayhi salam has sat down with Sayyidah Zainab, and I think you could, none that I can remember specifically, but I'm sure we've heard him that. And she replies to him, she says, Ya Ali, ya father, how can I say there's 2 when I believe in 1? There's only one God. There's only one ilah. At the age of 3 years old. So, that level of growth from such a young age.
Let me interject, Shaykhna. It's an interesting point. There's a few interesting points there.
No, I'm sure.
One insight at such a young age. Hala, 3 years old, Sayyidah Zainab, Salaam alayha. We'll skip that for right now. But Qasim ibn al-Hassan alayhi salam at 13, with the insight to be able to describe death in that way and to be able to recognize his position in this world, right? To have the ideological awareness of where he was and what he was doing. But more than that, his presence in that gathering at 13 years old, right? Like, think about it. When we have such important gatherings, do we have teenagers in the room, young teenagers at 13 who are able to voice their opinion, who are confident enough to voice their opinion? I don't think so, right? Why do we think that's the case? Like, do you think that him being the son of Imam Hassan alayhi salam and being a member of the Ahlul Bayt, that he was somehow special and different than other youth? Or do you think it's just youth in general were perceived differently in this pure form of religion?
Nice, very interesting question. So I think the fact that Qasim alayhi salam is from the offspring of Banu Hashim, specifically the son of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, has an effect. We can't put that aside. But it's one thing, to to come from a a well-known family, or to be respected, a well-respected figure because of your father or your grandfather. But it's another to portray that, and Qasim alayhi salam had the confidence to portray that. And that comes from learning, and from learning from his father and from his uncle, and finding that strength. And that strength is passed down. So the fact that we have role models like Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the fact that we have role models like the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, who have taught us how to communicate with our children, who have taught us how to communicate with youth, who have taught us the significance of youth, then when you bring up and strengthen the personality and the character, and give this child importance, give him significance, show him that his voice is heard, show him his voice is important, instead of giving that excuse of he's young, she's young, what do they know? It doesn't matter, they're young, let them do what they want, they're still young. But you're stunning their growth by telling them they're young. When you tell them they're young and it's okay and you can do this, and tomorrow they grow up and they get over it. But you're like, we just mentioned that what you're planting right now in this very fertile land, it's not something that's going to uphold this. When this kid is 20 or 25 and he has to hold responsibility of a household and marriage, that's where you find 25-year-olds, 28-year-olds today, in today's society. They don't know how to hold responsibility of a home. They don't know how to hold responsibility of, having a spouse, having a wife, and the emotional intelligence and the emotional needs. And it's just all about me. Because when they were young, they weren't taught. Whereas with the Imams, you see that from a young age, that the Holy Prophet is teaching Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, Imam Ali alayhi salam teaching his children, and Qasim being taught. And it's our fault. It's our obligation, Sheikhna. It's not the obligation. It's our obligation to teach them. It's our obligation to be patient with them.
Sheikhna Ali, would you agree that youth in our communities, right? Because I know you've worked a lot with the youth, and you've worked in youth groups and everything before you went to Hawza, and you've grown up in Nabi Akram, which I'm not singling out Nabi Akram as, as a community here, just communities in general though. Do you think the youth are kind of overlooked in these crowds?
Assalamu alaikum. Firstly, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Azamallahu ujurana wa ujurakum. That's a tough question to answer because it is very circumstantial. But what one can definitely say is that the potential the younger ones have is not utilized. Not only in our Islamic communities, but in the Western society we live in my opinion. And how that, trickles into our communities as Muslims, and how we manage our places of worship, schools, or whatever institution we are able to get our hands on. Of course, it will have its effect. At the same time, I feel like the Eastern culture is a culture that is bred with the idea that merit comes with age. And there is, of course, truth in that. We see the earliest historical origin of this as the appointment of none other than the first Khalifa, and the rejection of Ali alayhi salam on one of the reasons. Of course, you could say this was an excuse more than an actual reason, but because the reasons run deeper than the age, but it was nonetheless that Ali is young. And the other one was that he's too happy, always smiling and joking. When it's someone serious, old and grumpy. I think they got that. Yeah, so it is embedded in the Eastern culture, the idea of that with age comes merit, and there is truth in that. But that does not mean that we should mutually exclusively rule out the youth. Now, going back to the story of Imam Hussein, I have a counterintuitive proposal here. I know we've been, and this will be a good way to perhaps get the discussion flowing. At the same time that we are saying that the youth should be encouraged to take on responsibility and we should trust them with responsibility, do you think that Imam Hussein's reluctance to let Qasim go on the battlefield, if you read the books of history, you read the Maqatil, Qasim has to do a lot to convince Imam Hussein.
You know, he comes multiple occasions, kisses the hands of Imam, even kisses the feet of the Imam to let me go, to let me be part of this, to defend. But Imam delays it. Now, one could say, well, the Imam really loved him. After all, he was almost like, well, yeah, he was a father figure for Qasim ibn al-Hassan, given that Imam Hassan alayhi salam had martyred or over 10 years ago. But at the same time, I think there might be a lesson here that Imam only accepted after much insistence. This, I think, is hinting at the idea that, yes, we should trust the youth with responsibility, but what responsibility are we talking about here? Because there are major disadvantages in trusting the youth with responsibilities that they are not able to do. Yes, we trust you, we're confident, but you know, by the way, when we say youth, it includes people my age as well. We're starting from anyone as early as 12, 13, 14 to someone in their early 30s, if you like. But I'm guessing more predominantly we're focusing on the teenagers because we want to stay relevant to Qasim ibn al-Hassan. Are we giving the idea that any responsibility should be given to them, or should a level of caution be taken in this regard?
I wouldn't say any responsibility. I wouldn't say let's just throw them and you become the leaders of the community, right? I wouldn't say just anything off the bat. But one of the things I would say is that what I see in our centers, at least, and in the wider community, as the Shia community, I don't see anything happening in the Shia community, apart from the centers for kind of empowering the youth. But there could be stuff that exists I'm just not aware of. Regardless, with our centers, I see that, you know, we'll have a youth recite Quran. We'll have a youth do be the MC in a program. There might be a youth group where, you know, one of the youth would take charge of that youth group and kind of relay that back to the management team of what's happening and get permission, right? We have these tiny roles, but I don't see leadership skills being taught. I think first step would be to train them into a position, not just to throw them blindly into the position, right? And I feel that training them, like, well, actually there is the what is it, the Scouts Academy does leadership programs, so that's good. Just throw that out there. But I feel that we should be focusing on raising the youth to a position where they can take such roles, right? And I feel that that's not happening. So we're kind of like hoping university does that, or the job that they have will train them to be a manager, right? Where we're not giving them skills intertwined with the Islamic perspective. And I think that's a shortcoming of the community.
Do you think it's more of a wide-scale problem that, and this is what I was hinting to in my comments as well, that it's essentially as a function of our cultural look to the youngsters? Like once said that we give merit based on age. That's actually inherited from our own Eastern cultures. And at the same time, don't you feel that the way with the Western society or the Western way of life looks at kids in keeping them in schools up until year 10 or year 12, and then even in university years, they still pretty much, you don't get to experience the real world until the earliest is year 10, right? You leave with your school certificate, you can go start working. The next step is year 12, and then the next step is 4 years, 5 years after that. So, you know, up until 20, if most people do end up going to university, there is a large number of people that do end up going to university. Then up until 20, 21, 22, they're not exposed to any real life problems, right? So do you think the problem at hand is something more systematic than just one community or the next? And we need to become aware of that to then be able to be innovative in our own communities to sort of cater for that and compensate for what we're lacking.
So well, let me just interject really, really quickly and then go ahead, Sheikhna. I don't know if I agree 100% that a person in their early 20s in this society has not faced real world problems, right? Maybe they're in university, but I know, like, when I was in university, because I went obviously late after Hausa, I went to university, and many of my classmates lived on their own, right? So they were living in a, because it was in Wollongong, right? So they were living somewhere near campus because they're not from Wollongong, right? And maybe you're right, they don't have a full-time job and a family and taking care of the family, but it's not as like they're still engaging in the society, taking care of themselves in the house, right? So I do think at that age in the Western society, people do have responsibilities, a level of responsibilities, maybe even more than we give in our communities to youth. That's just something to throw out there. But sorry, Sheikhna, for cutting you off.
It's okay. It's okay. So the first disclaimer that you mentioned, Sheikh Ali, earlier, I have to reiterate that it's very important that, you know, with all of the stuff that we're talking about, with all of the responsibilities that we think youth should have, that doesn't mean that we're saying, hey, youth should be part of every decision that's made, anything that's, you know, that's surrounding them. They have, but, okay, so that's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is, and also this is to tackle the question of, is this a universal problem rather than, you know, a cultural problem? I have to agree with you also. It's a universal problem. If you go to the Eastern culture or the Western culture, you're always going to find a certain level, a problem with the way we perceive youth. But that's what Islam's for. You know what I mean? That's what Islam's coming to teach us. But that's the whole point. That before us, before, you know, we came to existence, there was this problem. The Holy Prophet came and he with his beautiful blueprint of Islam, he tried to teach us and explain to us how to perceive this youth and how to invest in this youth. And you know what? When you do, you know what happens? You get people like the likes of Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, who's a mujtahid at the age of 14. You know what I mean? And we're not saying this is specific to infallibility. This is specific to those who take action. So like Islam, firstly, the question is, do youth have, do they have the potential? Does a 13, a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old have the potential to grow in the first place? Islam says yes, you know, and just to shed light on that very briefly, just look at the taklif system that we have. You know, at the age of 9 for a girl and at the age of 14 for a boy, you know, what's obligatory upon you is the same as what's obligatory upon others when it comes to your spiritual growth. Salat is wajib, fasting is wajib. You know, there are key aspects to your growth as a youth that are obligatory on you, not when you're 17 or 18, not when you're 21 or 22, not at the legal age of drinking or driving, or, you know. No, at the age of 14, you are required to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you're capable as a 14-year-old. Now, when that potential is not unlocked, when that potential is hidden, when that potential is not shown to the world, when that child doesn't even know they have the potential, that's our problem. That's my fault. That's my fault as his older brother or as his father or as his teacher or as his sheikh, as his local scholar, or as anyone that is in charge of this person and just watching this person. They don't know. A 13-year-old doesn't know. They want to be heard. They want to have a voice. So, you know, let's be a bit practical and not just throw examples. Yeah, let's go to any center. Put Center X in Sydney. Yeah, if you wanted to let these youth, the youth of this center or the youth of the community be interactive, let's say you had an age scale between, you know, you had 8-year-olds all the way to the age of 30 in this center. You want to accommodate for them. You want to accommodate for all of these age groups. It's simple. It takes one program to accommodate for all of them. A leadership program amongst the top elderly that are going to implement the youth program, that are going to facilitate all of the logistics. And then you have a creative program by the younger ones that come up with different ideas. And they have to go to the younger children, to the youth, to the 10-year-old, to the 11-year-old, to the 12-year-old, to the 13-year-old, to the 14-year-old, and ask them, what interests you? Listen to them, talk to them, sit with them, play with them, see what interests them, see what they like, see what they need, See what this child's good at and what this child's good at. See what the creativity that because schooling system today doesn't extend the hand to the creativity of a child. The schooling system predominantly today was built for the capitalistic reality, for capitalism. They want to create something. So like I can personally look back at my time as in primary school and even to certain levels of high school. I don't remember much. It wasn't too relevant to my life because a lot of my potential was in different places. No one asked me for my potential. They asked me to choose subjects, what I thought my potential was. But what would I know? I'm 16, I'm 14, 15. I don't know what my potential is. You know what I mean? Like there's so much to work on. And that's our role. That's our role. Like I have to be the magnet that understands this child. So are they responsible for everything? Of course not. But there's a bare minimum that they can't begin to show and portray their strength in there until we help them, until we provide the platform. And Sheikh, I have to agree with you, Sheikh Hamad, that letting a child recite 2-minute poetry or 5-minute Quran, number one, that's singling out. That's one child that potentially has a voice or not, or has the confidence or not. But what about the 20 children that don't have a voice and don't have confidence? Look at that. Look at that problem. Now, when you have 10 or 15 youth at a center, one of them has a good voice, one of them is confident to do public speaking, and 3 of them just like to play soccer. So you're telling these 10 youth, the only 2 of you can add any significance to our program. The rest of you are just you. And growing up in a society when that's my elders are perceiving me like this, how do you expect to grow? So what do? You exit my culture society, you exit the Islamic way, and you search for significance in another world, in another place, a place where faith is not of relevance, a place where faith is not too important. And that's where it's so critical that when you have to engrave in stone into this youth, because later on it's going to be like writing on water, like the Holy Prophet says.
We have a couple questions. First one, this is an amazing idea, Sheikh Mohammed. Where can we sign up? So I guess the Scouts Academy would be that. I don't know, but that's a good one. Second one is also an interesting one, and Ali, why don't you tackle this one? We always are thinking about teaching kids to be leaders, but we forget that we need to teach them to be good followers first. What are your thoughts?
Oh, yes.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful.
You know what? I had Sheikh Muhammad opened a lot of Pandora boxes I wanted to get into, but I'm going to answer this question because I think we are, once again, this goes back to the schooling system. We are raised, the schooling system is in a way that we are required to question all the time. Now, on the surface, that's really good. I like the idea of always being curious, always asking questions, and there's no problem in that, right? But it has come at the cost of questioning everything and questioning every authority for the sake of questioning. Because no one should have a say in my life. And I think that's a very negative culture that's being built for the past maybe 20, 30 years, if not more prevalent in the last 10 to 20 years. And this is completely against not only Islamic ideals, but Western conservative Christian ideals that have been lived in the West. We're not bashing the West because it's the West, but because there are negative elements that are currently being manifested in modern society, and they're clearly detrimental to how we even grow as adults, let alone children. If you look at the apprenticeship system that probably existed around 200, 300 years ago, of course, it will be even more recent. But nonetheless, when there is an apprentice and there is a master, right, the child from a young age is learning to respect, is learning to surrender. They at the same time, they have to learn, they have to educate themselves, they have to be curious, they have to learn the trade, they have to learn the skill, they have to learn this. There is the element of curiosity, but at the same time, there is an element of surrendering to the master who has more expertise and experience than you. And I feel like that's been completely lost. And that's something we have in our Islamic tradition. One of the challenges anyone that has from going from West to the Hausa is that, well, you have both sides, but I'm going to focus on this side. You have people going there and carrying that negative aspect of that questioning nature in them, in that trait in them. When they're there, they're questioning everything, and that blocks them from being able to benefit from people because of that arrogant, if I should use that word, arrogant stance we put towards any form of authority, right? Because how dare anyone dictate how my life is told to me and how I should live my life? So yeah, I totally agree with the question that at the same time that we should, you know, here's the thing, there's a conflation. When we say our youngsters should be accepting responsibility, this does not mean to be leaders. We're not equating the two. Being the only way to be responsible is not to be a leader. It's to do what you have to do. Now, you might be put in a position of leadership at whatever age, and you have your set responsibilities. And at the same time, you might be in a position where you're not the leader. I feel like in the West, this idea of being a leader is, by the way, sensationalized, and it's made a fantasy that everyone has to be a leader in some one way or another. I think that's a false fantasy, which is a result, and it is a product of this idea of questioning every authority. But you're right. If we don't begin from young age to understand that, look, there are people who know better than me. There are people who have lived in this field, in this trade, in this discipline, in this community for years, twice, thrice my age, right? And if I'm not willing to at least sit down with them, because there is a negative idea as well, and this is happening, we see a lot of independent youth groups popping out as a reaction to community centers that are not giving them room to do anything. But I feel like, you know what, I shouldn't open that door. But
can I play devil's advocate on that one? Can I play devil's advocate on that thing? So I definitely agree. So like, you know, and Ahsan for mentioning that, Sheikh, that when we say there's a certain level of responsibility that you want youth to hold, we're not saying leadership responsibility. We're saying if they make a mistake, let them be responsible for that mistake. You know, don't justify it for them. And of course, all the other examples we mentioned earlier. But there's something that I find interesting when it comes to trying to understand the why behind a teenager's or a youth's action. So if I do something now, if you, Sheikh Ali, do something right now, and I question the intention, I take into consideration he's a wise person, he's got experience, he knows what's happening in the world, he knows right from wrong, he knows what's good, he knows what's bad, and he's made that decision. With a child, it's a bit different. So with a child, I don't know, I might be wrong. Sheikh Hamid can correct me if I'm wrong. Of course, he's a professional in this regard. But learning, there's different ways of learning, okay? The first way, and this is the way that the child depends on from a young age, from the age of, from as soon as they're born to the age of 7, even a bit older, but to the age of 7, these critical years, okay, even the hadith mentioned this, that they learn by watching and hearing from visually. They see examples of respect. They see examples of kindness. They see examples of and of and of. So they see examples of leadership. When they grow up and they're now they're meant to be taught, and I agree, they have to be taught that, they have to respect elders. Of course, they must respect elders. All of us should respect elders, no matter how old you are. There's always that guideline. But what does respect mean to them? That's the problem. See, respect means to them what they have seen and what they've picked up on from those that are around them, from their parents and from their siblings, from the ones that influence their mind. So if there's a constant environment of disrespect, a constant environment of swearing and music, and just a toxic environment for the spiritual self, don't think that your 6-year-old or 5-year-old or 7-year-old or 8-year-old or 10-year-old is just, this is harmless to them. No, it's very critical to what they perceive as good, right, respectful, kind when they're older. So I agree with you, but there is like, we can't just always, like, there's a bigger responsibility. Basically what I'm trying to say is there's a bigger responsibility on us, and until we feel at least 90% of that responsibility, it's hard to throw it back on them. You know what I mean? Like, and there's a few other points that I wanted to mention, but what do you think of that, Shah?
No, I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
We're trying to say what needs to be, what are the components, what are the elements, what are the ideals that need to be transferred and educated to youngsters so they can be responsible individuals. A component of that is respect for authority when there is a respectable authority, right? And I don't think we disagree on that. There's a good question here. Yeah. I think, sorry, I'll just mention this here. The question says, we say center this, center that. What is the role of the parent in this? A center cannot be a substitute for this. What are your thoughts on this? Absolutely correct. I feel maybe our conversation has taken the route of just focusing on what communities can do, but bulk of the work is done by parents and schools, in my opinion. Now, the role of community centers would be to try to compensate for areas that the two cannot somehow fulfill, right? Or provide a way in which these three components of the school, the parents, and the community can work together, like provide a dynamic for that. So thank you for that question, in case our discussion was heading towards one way or another. But in terms of like responsibility, you mentioned the idea of taklif. I just wanted to have a waqfa there. Just a thought, you know, in the Quran, we have the idea, this is in affirmation of what you said, but also adding on top of it. We have the idea of bulugh in the Quran, which is religious responsibility, right? But we also have the idea of rushd in the Quran. If an orphan, this is the verse that is also for orphans and other cases in the Quran. If they're not able to be able to manage their financial affairs, even if they've reached the stage of bulugh, right? You are not to give their money to them, right? Because they have not reached the state of rushd, which means I would put it as financial responsibility and social responsibility. The point I want to make here is that why is Allah delegating social responsibility after religious responsibility? And I think this is a key factor that Sheikh Ahmed wants to touch on about religious education. Now, there is an obvious answer to this, and the obvious answer is, well, simply just because you know how to fast and you know how to pray and you know how to read the Quran, on all other religious responsibilities that are ibadat, that are acts of worship, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to control financial matters and social challenges, right? But there is something deeper here, in my opinion, is that Allah has set up a logical manner in which a child is to be educated. He wants to clarify, right? He wants to clarify two things. Firstly, that you are responsible to me before anyone else. When he makes us firstly religiously responsible, before we become socially responsible, before we become financially responsible, to be answering to God, he's saying, look, there is no fear of, don't fear your parents, and I have a nice memory from this, don't fear certain institutions like schools and teachers in the sense of a negative fear, not respect for authority. Dare I say, don't even fear larger institutions like governments and whatnot. But from the very beginning, you're dealing with me. Anything you do is for me, and you're going to be accountable for me. The idea here is that you, before you're able to become socially responsible, all right, before you're able to take on these responsibilities, become a leader, if you like, as fantasized as that become, you need to become God conscious. And I think that's what is being both missed in schools, both missed in homes, both missed in community centers, if you like. Of course, all tried their best. I have this short story when I was young. It won't take 30 seconds and I'll pass it to you, Sheikh Ahmed. My father, when I was very young, maybe when I was 6 or 7, he used to encourage me to memorize the Quran. And it was nice because every time I memorized the surah, and I would go into competitions and I would win. This is in Iran, by the way. And I would always win prizes, okay? And I was really happy about this. I remember one night I did well in some competition or whatnot, and then he bought me this puzzle for me to, obviously deassemble and put it back together. And I really enjoyed that. And then he said, okay, look, after tonight, there are no more puzzles. I was like, what? What do you mean? Why are there no more puzzles? As in, there's no more rewards, no more prizes for you. And mind you, I was like, probably, yeah, at best 6 or 7. And he's like, well, from here
No
on,
more Quran.
from here on, you're dealing with God. You have to do this for God. And I was shattered. I'll tell you, I was shattered that night. I was like, come on, man. I want my prizes. I want my rewards. But that's the
Why don't
reality.
we have both?
that I think that's the reality God is trying to teach us with this bulugh idea, that you need to come face to face with me before you're able to accept social responsibility. And we need to educate
Sheikh Hamid, I miss your voice, Sheikh Hamid. I feel like you've been pushed aside, Sheikh Hamid. We pushed you aside. We're bullying you. Sorry.
No, I'm just learning. It's good. Just a few points, just grabbing off of what you guys said. There was a question about teaching leadership and being a follower, and how maybe it's misconstrued that we're not teaching people to be followers. But I feel that one part of leadership is being a true follower of those kind of above you. Being a leader doesn't mean you're the leader of the world, right? There's only going to be one person. Yeah. If we look at our Maraja, are our Maraja not followers as well? No. Like, obviously they're the best of followers, right? So when we're talking about leadership skills, I think as both sheikhs mentioned, it's more about how to take responsibility in the various aspects of their lives. And one aspect of taking responsibility is listening to those who, are above you. So I don't think the two, being a leader and being a follower are mutually exclusive. You could be both at the same time, right? And I think that's what we would be emphasizing. Second, I feel there was a point you mentioned, Ali, about parents. And yes, definitely parents have a huge role here. We're concentrating this discussion more on community, but parenting would have a huge role in a couple ways. One, facilitating the correct education of the child and the correct upbringing if you're not doing it yourself, which you can't do everything yourself. So you do need a community to help. And it's kind of facilitating these kind of ideals that we're talking about through the community. I feel that right now school does have more of an effect on our community members than our community centers do, but I feel that that's wrong. I feel that our community centers should have more of an effect. It's just they're not strong enough, or they're not emphasized enough in the household for that to happen. And I feel also our centers are, I feel not just 1 day a week centers. We're doing more than that. We're doing a better job than that, but we need to improve the services that we're providing for the community in order to increase the effect that we have on the community. Then finally, your point about religiousness and rushd, I thought that was very interesting. That Allah does make the age of taklif younger than many instances of social responsibility that a youth would have. And the potential reasons for that are nice, and that story was beautiful as well. MashaAllah, I love your father. And I feel that it is very important that we do teach that level of God consciousness in our children. So that comes at a parent level and at a center level and a community in general level, where I feel we don't. I feel we focus so much on fear, and if you do this, you're going to hell. And we focus a lot on, if you disobey your parents, you're going to hell, because that helps parents. If you disobey your elders, you're going to hell, because that helps elders. But just in general, I feel that that's the way that we're teaching religion. Or maybe if you do this, you go to heaven, right? But I feel we should be concentrating the most on, maturity. Everything you should be doing is trying to make God happy, make Allah happy, right? So that's where we should be at. But sorry, it's kind of jumbled. I was trying to keep track of everything. here. All right, there's another question that came up. All right, I find many young people today make excuses and like to blame everyone but themselves. They're not even accepting responsibility for their own actions. How can we manage this issue?
Nice.
Sheikh, that's yours.
Is that me?
That's yours, yes.
Okay. I do feel that happens a lot. I don't want to dismiss that. And taking responsibility for one's actions at that age is a difficult thing to do sometimes. But I feel that we do need to emphasize and encourage our youth to do that as parents, as community members. And yes, when they do take responsibility for a negative action that they perform, they will be punished by it. But if they don't, I see a lot of times, like when I was working at the school, like the kid will lie over and over and over and over again that they didn't do it, and then finally they're going to admit it when they're forced to, basically, right? So it's something that we see all the time, but we do need to encourage that, because I feel that, you know, one aspect of growing up basically and being an adult is being able to take responsibility for the negative actions that you've done, and religiously, not to others but to God, being able to take responsibility for your shortcomings and asking Allah to forgive you and to help you overcome them is huge. And I feel that just like a lot of things that we're mentioning, they're not emphasized in our our school system. They're not really emphasized in our centers or in our just the way that we teach our children. And it's that those are changes that need to happen. I think unfortunately, a lot of the answers of these questions are agree, and we need to change ourselves. And that comes from, you know, the level of ulama that we're at, where we need to kind of change the way that Islam is kind of fed to the community and beyond us as well. Like, everyone has a role here. Let me jump to another question. There's a bunch of questions.
On that question, if I can just say something, that just a quick practical advice I'd give on that thing is that, you know, sometimes when we come to the youth of today that aren't holding responsibility, that don't claim responsibility for the mistakes or don't listen to the elders. So once again, the cause of that we've already mentioned. That most times it's because of our upbringing, our lack of attention. But if that's the case now, two ways that would be good to work on this issue is, number one, give the child a responsibility. Like, give them a responsibility, not make them responsible for their actions. But, like, for example, if you want your child to you know, clean their room, you know, make them responsible for cleaning their room, and also attach to them a rewarding system, like making them responsible for something, and they haven't attached the reward to it, then they're not gonna, like, in the beginning stages, at the beginning, that's how we are. Most humans are like that. If you're gonna do something and there's no reward, instant gratification, then you're gonna have to have the wisdom and the patience to look for. That's where success comes into play, where most of us are always looking for instant gratification. And as a youth, that's dominant in their personality. So try and, instead of giving them something physical, make them responsible and show them a rewarding system for that. And maybe on other nights or another time we can go in depth on this, but let's try and tackle the other questions. But that's something that I do.
Yeah, it's good. And I think that's great. Like, obviously your son is very young, and
yeah,
that's you know, you have to do that, right? You have to. I think when we're talking about religion, though, like Ali was saying, right, as we kind of grow and as we kind of mature, then you know, telling your son who's 16 years old, who's been you know, here, I'm going to give you $100 if you pray today, like.
No, of course not.
Like,
materialistic, materialistic rewarding system. A rewarding system for the responsibility. Make them feel that they have accomplished something themselves when they are responsible for something. Do you know what I mean?
And I think it's great. Like, these are amazing amazing topics that I feel we need to sit down and really think about after Muharram and kind of put something together. And I think like there's a question here that says maybe centers can work on a program to help parents build a strong Islamic foundation in a Western society, or an online Zoom program. Thoughts? Definitely agree.
Nice.
Definitely, I think
Nice.
that's something that we really need to do. And I feel that's something that we can do. So maybe just side note for us three, we can discuss that and trying to create these things afterwards, inshallah, and see if we could put some of them into practice. All right, there's this question, the top question here. There is lots of focus on being a leader to others. Does leadership not mean having control over your own power, desires, and aspirations?
Can I jump onto that one? Okay. We have been talking about the perspective that the elders should have towards the youth and what they should do to educate them, to raise them, to make sure they become responsible. And a part of this answer also goes to the parents and those elders and guardians and what have you. But speaking directly to the youth, those who are listening to this program, you are living in an age where from the earliest time you can remember, you probably held a phone and a tablet and you were exposed to technology. If you have any aspirations to become a successful person in your life, you have any aspirations to have a meaningful sense of life, then I'm going to tell you that over exposure to technology, social media, which is a common problem, and it's a problem that's just innocently looked at. Oh, it's just, it makes him quiet, it makes her quiet, and it just carries on with us. And it leads to sometimes really negative addictions like pornography, but even social media use in and of itself, right, is damaging your brain, right? Here, we're talking about what we should do in terms of practical steps to make sure they are raised responsibly, they are raised to be God conscious. I think we need to provide that environment, and that environment is really hard to be provided with if you've got something as appealing as social media and technology always taking their attention away. I think no child would have any care for what we have to say here for them. Look, I was happy at 6 for solving puzzles. You tell a child that they're going to give you a jigsaw puzzle for a reward, they'll laugh at your face and they'll probably make a post about you on Facebook. This idiot told me he's going to give me.
No, if you get it for them, they'll probably get upset.
Yeah, they'll probably never listen to you again. So because of this, and we've had chats about this before as well, that a life that is filled with dopamine left, right, center, their nervous system, all it requires is the next dopamine rush. And this applies to adults on a much higher degree, but at least in that critical stage of being youth and being how receptive, as the hadith said, how fertile they are. If the youth themselves don't take into consideration, and their parents, of course, the damaging effects of technology, then I think we're just going to have, sorry to say, a generation of, I don't know what's a nice word to use, but if you are becoming day in and day out used for instant gratification, like Sheikh Muhammad was saying, then how are we even expecting the youth to be able to have long-term plans, not let alone community at this stage? How can they even have long-term plans for their own lives? If your brain and nervous system is only used to instant gratification, how can it possibly sit down with itself, pull its hair out and say, God damn it, I have to plan for my life in the next 5 years? Like, that's a seriously hard conversation to have with yourself, right? It's hard for adults. We like to, and I think quarantine or lockdown has made everyone have like these existential crises and questioning their lives, because now they have time with themselves to talk to themselves for once. There is no routine anymore that they can forget everything. Now, to a higher degree and by priority, this applies to children. If they're not going to be used to not instantly be rewarded, experience a form of delayed hardship, boredom, if you like, all of these different discussions that are not only discussed, by the way, in Islamic circles, but there are a lot of authors and thinkers who are talking about this. If we're not doing anything in that regard, we're not moderating technology, I don't think we're providing any environment for them to think freely and responsibly.
Yeah, it's a big topic, that one. And there is a lot of research that's been done recently on it, and you could see, like, I know, like, on a psychological perspective, internet addiction or gaming addiction has not been introduced as a hasn't been introduced in the literature as, you know, a formal addiction like gambling has or substance use has. But I feel that it will be in the next major diagnostic manual that's released. I would be shocked if it's not mentioned there, because a lot of the research does show that very similar reactions in the brain occur after substance use, gambling, and also this type of interaction with
but
internet.
as a parent, I wouldn't give my son a cigarette, but I might give him a phone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how negligent we are. Honestly, I was speaking about myself first and foremost. Like, and most times it sort of comes across as lazy, or like you just can't be bothered to do something with your child. So, all right, here's my phone, and just watch and just shush and sit in the corner, and you know, and I'm just causing some major internal negative side effects that I won't reap till he was like 16 or 18, and he's screaming in my face and being, you know, rude and whatnot. I'm like, why are you speaking to me like that? Because I gave him the phone when he was 4, mate. You know what I mean? Because I got him so addicted to that instant gratification.
I mean, obviously, we wouldn't give our child, you know, narcotics, right? Ever, inshallah, ever. We probably wouldn't introduce them to gambling either, inshallah, ever, right? But with the phone, definitely, look, the phone does have a place, though. If we don't allow them to use any type of
any monitored usage is
any
good.
type of technology, then they're going to fall behind. Like, what job nowadays doesn't use technology in it? Right? So if they're not able to utilize technology, then they're at a disadvantage as well. So as Sheikh Ali said, it's all about moderating it.
There was a troll question saying, if social media is so bad, why are you on social media right
now? You gotta use
it's like you can't live with it, can't live without it.
It's about moderation.
There's actually this book, Irresistible. It's speaking about social media addiction, or just general technology addiction, and they actually mentioned the story of Steve Jobs. I think it was in 2010 or 2013, when he was doing the advertising for the iPad. He was just releasing the iPad, and he was going and telling the world how, you know, he'd sit for an hour and a half with a presentation about how the iPad is the solution to your problems. It fixes this and it solves that. And as a child, you can, you know, let your children watch this. And then he's asked after, like, do your children have an iPad? It's like, no, they're not allowed to use technology. The guy that created they're not allowed to use it. They're not allowed to have screen time. They're not allowed to have an iPad, because he knows how effective it is. We're not saying live under a rock, of course not, but it doesn't mean, like, the example I gave earlier is, if I give the phone out of laziness, if I'm monitoring my son, if there's a certain, you know, if I'm wise with when I allow him to use it, when I don't allow him to use it, how to use it, then of course, like, you don't want him to grow up thinking, you know, going to his friend's house and he sees a TV, he's like, oh, what's that? You don't want that as well. Like, it's not like you know, it's got to be a two-way street.
Nice. And there's plenty of positive usages from social media, like this talk today, for instance. Inshallah. Why don't you read the next question, Ali?
Nowadays, youth are not thinking about jihad fi sabilillah. What can we do as a community to guide our youth due to Western influence, trying to make certain things in Islam look bad, which might brainwash some youth?
Yeah. So if that like, and that is a problem, of course, that's a problem. But once again, that comes down to a few things we mentioned earlier, that, you know, a child is not meant to know about jihad fi sabilillah or jihad al-nafs unless you teach them about jihad al-nafs. Unless they, you know, there's a certain way that you teach them. You make them understand it to their knowledge, not teach them how you want to understand it. And, you know, take into consideration how you know, they add meaning to things. You know, if a child wants to learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're asking constant questions, and Baba, why did this guy do this? Why did God create this? And why did God create that? And they constantly ask you, and why is this happening? instead of you getting angry at them and saying, you know, saying what you want to say, oh, I already told you, repeat to them at a young age, repeat to them the beauty of God, you know, consistently repeat to them. And as they grow older, you're the one that's in charge of, you know, how they perceive it. After that, Sheikhna, the question that was mentioned earlier, I think Sheikh Ali was answering it earlier about leading oneself. I think that is one of the most powerful questions that one can ask themselves. How can I really lead myself? How can I lead by example? How can I become the best version of myself? And whoever asked that, you know, props to you, because I have to agree that, you know, we're in an age where, although leadership or the concept of leadership or the ideal of leadership is, you know, has been taken astray from left to right, but in reality and in its essence is that, you know, we all are leaders. We all are leaders, and we're all followers. Like Sheikh Ali and Sheikh Hamid mentioned earlier, we're all followers to one stage. Even a marja is a follower. Even Imam Ali alayhi salam is a follower. You know, even Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa is a follower of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we're also all leaders. You know, we lead ourselves first and foremost. If we don't have any offspring or little younger siblings, or we do, or we're teachers, or we have a certain role in the community, or we have a certain role in a family. So, you know, learning how to master so learning how to master yourself and your emotions, and taking your emotional intelligence into consideration, as well as your spiritual growth and whatnot. Of course, it's instrumental and key to learning how to, you know, work on your children or youth in general. So yeah, that's something that we should all be taking into consideration and working on.
Ahsan. All right, I think are we good to lead it into the Masab now, brother?
Fadal, there's a lot more to say, but I think we're going to need 3 more hours to cover everything. So let's probably end it here.
Sure.
So, in conclusion of all what we just spoke about, by acknowledging the position of youth and their critical role in society, as well as our role and our critical role in the growth of the youth, there are some results and causes you can and will find. So if you treat a young adult with respect, if you give them attention, if you create the best intellectual and spiritual environment for them, then what you will produce is a person, a youth, a 13-year-old like Qasim alayhi salam, who perceives one of the most scariest realities known to man, death, as the sweetest or sweeter than honey. You know, that, like, when you think of the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, you think that, you know, age was never taken into consideration, in a sense that age and experience and how strong you are of a warrior, and that was never the goal with the companions of Abu Abdullah Hussein alayhi salam. The martyr, the shaheed, ranged from the age of 6 months to narration state 90 years old. And between them, you had young youth, and you had older, and you had young men, and you had teenagers, and you had some in their prime that were in love with Imam Hussein alayhi salam, in love with martyrdom, in love with shahada, in love with obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of gratitude. He stands, Lisan Hal Qasim, Uncle Hussein, he stands. Qasim raises his hand. After hearing what's going to happen to the companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, Qasim raises his hand. Uncle, will I be one of those? Of who, ya Qasim? who will be slaughtered. Qasim, the son of my beloved Hassan. Imam Hussein asks, Qasim, the son of my beloved Hassan, how do you perceive death, Ya Qasim? كيف ترى الموت? عم حسين حسين يا مولاي والله I swear sweeter than honey أحلى من العسل يا عمار جزاك الله يا قاسم. Yes, you will be slaughtered, Zainab. The day has come. Ya Zainab, the day has come. Prepare our brother's son. Prepare our brother's son. Qasim, Ya Zainab. Qasim, come to me, my love. Qasim, come to me, my love. Ya Aba Abdullah, he's dressed, we've dressed him. Ya Aba Abdullah, he's dressed with his father's armor. He is dressed with his father's armor. Brothers and sisters, no armor was made to fit a 13-year-old boy. Farewell, oh disgraced dunya. Farewell, oh disgraced dunya. You let the greatest of men be slaughtered, Ya Hussein, Ya Dunya. You let the greatest of men be slaughtered by the evilest of them, Hussein, Ya Hussein. Hussein, Ya Hussein.
صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة وموضع الرسالة ومختلف الملائكة ومهبط الوحي ومعدن الرحمن وخزان العلم ومنتهى الخير صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله صلى الله عليك أيها المظلوم صلى الله عليك أيها الشهيد بكربلاء عطشانا. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon you, O our dear Imam al-Hussein, our beloved Imam who was slaughtered by the shores of the Furat, whilst his mouth was dry from thirst. Inshallah, tonight we'd like to remember the pure sacrifice of another son of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba. We'd like to remember Qasim ibn Hassan, this young boy who was only 13 or 14 years in Karbala. On the eve of Ashura, after Imam al-Hussein had spoken to his companions, young Qasim was standing all alone by the side as if feeling left out. He comes to Imam al-Hussein and asks the Imam, أَأَنَا فِي مَنْ يُقْتَلْ? Oh uncle, tomorrow will I too be amongst those who will be killed in defending you? Imam Hussein alayhi salam looks to this pure innocent face of his nephew and asks him, Ya Qasim, kayfa al-mawtu indak? In your opinion, how do you find death, O Qasim? This young Qasim, who had been raised by Imam Hassan alayhi salam for this very purpose, to defend Imam al-Hussein in Karbala, replies, فيك أحلى من العسل. In defending you, O uncle, death is sweeter than honey. On the day of Ashura, Qasim kept desperately asking Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam for permission to go to the battlefield. Every time he'd ask Imam Hussein alayhi salam, Imam would turn him away. Perhaps Imam Hussein alayhi salam would be thinking that, oh Qasim, you are the only resemblance left behind that reminds me of my brother Hassan. The reports say that one time, فَأَلْقَى الْغُلَامُ بِنَفْسِهِ يُقَبِّلُ قَدَمَيْهِ وَرِجْلَيْهِ. Qasim began kissing the hands and the feet of Imam al-Hussein, asking for permission. Until Imam Hussein alayhi salam gives him permission. فانتنقا وبكى بكاء مرا. Imam Hussein hugs his nephew, they embrace each other and they both weep and cry. Now Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam helps Qasim mount his horse. He carries his sword and Qasim storms into the battlefield. The reports say that Qasim was so small that his feet were seen dangling. One of the reports from the enemies says that suddenly we see this young boy as though he was the moon. خرج إلينا غلام كأنها وجهه شقة القمر. We saw this glowing face of Qasim, the spirituality of this young boy ready for Shahada. Qasim bravely shouts out to the enemies, إن تنكروني فأنا ابن الحسن. If you don't know me, then I'm the son of Hassan. سبط النبي المصطفى والمؤتمن. The grandson of the Prophet, the chosen one. هذا الحسين كالأسير المرتهن. This is Hussein, like a prisoner that you've held captive for ransom. Qasim then begins fighting with bravery impossible for someone of his age to have. The enemies could see the blood of Ali and Fatima in him. No one dared to get even close to him. Reports say that despite being of tender age, he puts to sword 35 men, with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam watching his every move. But then these cowardly enemies, when they see that Qasim is getting weaker and weaker from the intense thirst, when Qasim's getting weaker from the weight of the armor, these enemies surround little Qasim from all sides. Then one mal'oon, one cursed man, runs towards Qasim and strikes him with his sword on his head. Qasim, this young boy, falls to the ground calling out, Ya Amma, Adrikni. Oh uncle, come to my help. At this stage, there was an order from the enemies to get their horses to run over the young body of Qasim. Imam Hussein alayhi salam reaches the body of Qasim. He sees Qasim frantically moving his legs. Imam tries to help Qasim, but the wound was too deep. Imam Hussein alayhi salam sits down, places Qasim's head on his lap and says, Azza wallah ala ammi. By Allah, how painful is this for your uncle. أن تدعوه فلا يجيبك. That you called on to him but he couldn't answer. أو يجيبك فلا ينفعك. Or if he answered you, that he could be of no help. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون.
Thank you very much to our dear Shuyukh for that very engaging discussion today, and also thank you to the audience who took part in the Q&A. I think that was very engaging tonight as well. I felt like there was some questions from management, comments from youth, and even some parents there. So alhamdulillah, we're all asking questions, and a few shots there from the Shuyukh at the community management. But on behalf of the community management, I'm asking the youth, please go onto that tab on the right-hand side, the little clipboard on Vivox, and give us your opinion on what you think, and what you think is good, what you think we need to add. So, and also before we end tonight, a big thank you to Brother Sheikh Muhammad Dahaini and Brother Abbas Birji for the Masa'ib recitations. May Allah bless you all. That's it for tonight. Everyone stay safe. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.